With that, 8 weeks has went by and elation is finally here. Who is AHA? Who wants to be an Aeon? Free 5-star selector, multiple reruns, and many more. Hey guys, MrPokke here. So for today's content, we are just gonna be talking about the CM pony opinions for the start of our new era, and that's gonna be Yao Guang, Sparxie, as well as all the reruns. So we do have the reruns of Evernight, Highlands, and Black Swan, followed by Sparxie's rerun of Serija, Redbar, as well as Sparkle. Now, one very important thing to note is that while Honkai Star is gonna be starting Yao Guang's banner on Friday instead of Wednesday, which is going to be the 13th instead of the 11th. And Yao Guang's banner will actually last the entirety of version 4, which means her banner will be a 6-week banner ending on the same day as Sparkle. But Yao Guang's reruns will still last the usual 3 weeks, so before Sparkle's banner is going to proceed, you can still get your Evernight and all that kind of stuff, but then after that, they'll rotate out for a new rerun banner. So before we jump into the actual meat and potatoes for the different units, I would just like to quote this part from my previous pony opinion right here. I cannot stress this enough. Spend your additional pools very, very carefully. Don't just blow it all on an E2 Cyrene and go into version 4 unprepared, right? So for reference, my personal free-to-play account is gonna probably go into version 4 with almost 400 pools, completely free-to-play by the time it rolls around the, I believe it's the 13th of February, because I plan to essentially skip the entire 3.8 patch and commit into the next version flagship when it comes. So now that the time is here, I hope that you guys didn't just spend your pools and your strategies for, like, you know, just random units for the past 8 weeks, because, you know, it's really, really boring. Because version 4.0 is going to be looking extremely juicy between the new archetypes, the potential additions of new elation units going forward for the elation archetype itself. I've already tested Sparxie, Yao Guang, the reverse Sparkle, etc. in the creator server, and they bring about some very, very fun mechanics that will be perfect for players wanting to try a new team comp after Remembrance flagship pretty much destroys everything. On that note, do not expect the new elation units to instantly outdamage a flagship, for example, like the Remembrance flagship or maybe even the final flagship, especially at 2v4, because if that actually happened, number one, elation will be completely overtuned for 2 units to outpace 4 units with a dedicated team comp, and number 2, it will basically destroy anyone's faith in full investing for a single archetype. So I hope that as of right now in version 4.0, Sparxie and Yao Guang should not be outperforming full version 3 team comps like the most notable Remembrance flagship. So with that out of the way, let's just jump into our very first unit, and that is going to be Yao Guang. So for both her as well as Sparxie, the early access will be coming not this Wednesday, but this Sunday. Yes, so by the time I recorded this video, I have less than 48 hours to crank out both early access guides just for you guys. So it is going to be coming very, very soon. Hearts in the chat for myself as well as my editor, right? So Yao Guang basically reminds me of a Kafka, but for the elation archetype, namely because of Yao Guang's ability to grant an extra AHA instance on command with the ultimate alongside with the other buffs, just like how Kafka can proc DOT for all of your DOT units. And the reason why I want to compare Yao Guang alongside with Kafka is because a DOT archetype, they will want to stack on all of the different DOTs as much as possible, like your bleed as well as wind shear. Then you want to let a detonator like Kafka proc that DOT to do the highest amount of damage. So with a little bit of similarities to DOT, you kind of want to have as many elation units as possible, and then you want to proc those elation skills as frequent as possible, which is going to be done with Yao Guang's AHA instance from the ultimate. As of right now, don't worry about how AHA actually works. We will be having a dedicated video which I've already made in the early access server talking about exactly how this mechanic is going to be, but the general gist is that she acts like a AHA battery or the AHA detonator, while the rest of your elation team will add on the damage to the battery via their respective elation skills. So for now, there's only Yao Guang as well as Sparxie, but as elation teams will take shape in the future, her use of elation is extremely promising, just like Kafka as well as DOT. So the overall rating for elation mains, it is going to be, as of right now, 9 out of 10, but a potential 10 out of 10. Now, the reason why, despite being a support, especially for the brand new archetype, she didn't get an instant 10 out of 10 is because that the main concern for Yao Guang ties with one of my fundamental principles when it comes to pooling in Honkai Star, which is you pool supports for DPS, but you don't pool DPS for support. And because Yao Guang is going to be the first ever elation unit and being a elation support, with Sparxie following soon after, Hoyo likely knows how limited her use case is going to be with the current team comps that we have right now, developed over through version 2 as well as version 3. So having the banner run in tandem with Sparxie is supposed to show elation synergy with one another and not so with the other team comps. So with that being said, if you're going to be putting Yao Guang purely for other archetypes, you will find much better options for a lot of these units, such as for example, Dahlia for Super Break, Evernight for Castris, as well as Saridra for Phylon, which are all banners that have happened very recently or are happening in the upcoming reruns. Now, a potential logic for putting Yao Guang very quickly while waiting for Sparxie could be for units in version 1, which has not received any support upgrade for a very long time. So, for example, your E2 Dale or even your version 1 DPS like Jingyuan and Scylla, because she will definitely have some kind of synergy, not specifically with these version 1 units themselves, but with the shield environment to form our Elation wheelchair, especially if EMC comes in the future to form a very solid 3-man party, DPS, Yao Guang, EMC, and one more of the sustain. Now from that point, pivoting to a Sparxie Elation DPS or even more Elation units in the future, which may take the spot of the Elation main DPS, it can also form shape. So whatever the main DPS is going to be Sparxie, is it going to be Silph, SP, or maybe even if like EMC is going to be sustain, who knows. So as such, Yao Guang's value for Elation is going to be very stable, but limited if you already have a very stable team, such as Remembrance Flagship, Super Break Flagship, or even the Final Hyper Carry, or any of the full Enforced cast with Cyrene. Now, that being said, there is never a late situation to get the support in Honkai Star Rail due to their multiple reruns based on the new DPS. So, for example, if version 4.2 is going to be the Elation flagship, it's either going to be, for example, like Ivan Hazel or even it's going to be Silver Wolf. Yao Guang's rerun likelihood is going to be extremely high, as seen from both Tribi as well as Run Maze rerun from version 3 as well as version 2 respectively. So, frankly speaking, if you don't know it right now, you could just get it in the future when we know exactly what is going to be the main DPS for Elation and whether or not Yao Guang even has a good synergy with them. Now, moving on to the next unit, and that is going to be Sparxie. Like I mentioned, early access will be also coming this Sunday as we take a deep dive into a kit. Smash the hearts and dovies in the chat for myself as well as my editor, because of at this point, I don't even know what sleep. So if Yao Guang was gonna be the Kafka of Elation, then Sparxie is going to be like the Black Swan, where she adds on the raw damage as well as punchline stacking, which then causes the synergy with Yao Guang's Aha instance activation to trigger and deal way more damage as a whole. So Sparxie reminds me a lot of a skill point based DPS due to the skill where you essentially spam the skill button as much as possible to stack on your punchlines, which will then convert into a higher Aha damage from the Aha instance. The ultimate is going to be a very simple AoE that scales off Elation while adding more punchlines, but generally, Sparxie's entire kit is going to be extremely straightforward. You can kind of just think of her as like a QQ. You'll spend your skill points, hope for more punchlines, and you just deal big damage. That's pretty much it. So for the Elation mains, Sparxie is going to be an 8 out of 10. Otherwise, it might be a potential 8.5 out of 10. Yes, between both units, Yao Guang is going to inherently hold way more value as a Elation support compared to a DPS like Sparxie. This is kind of like putting Black Swan without Kafka or Phylon without Saridra. Now, CN converts Sparxie a little bit like Aglaia to the second half version 4.0, just like the second half version 3.0, which will definitely shine if you compare Sparxie to the non-shield DPS with the Elation shield buffs. But once future Elation DPS releases, for example, Yai Sakura or the Silph SP, it might be a little bit hard to compete in that particular slot over there. And that being said, one thing to consider is that Sparxie is fundamentally an Elation unit, and the entire Elation archetype is based on how many Elation units can you stack in a single team to have more Elation skills, punchlines generated across the entire team, and thus having more synergy. Assuming you can have EMC in the future update, this means that the final slot, it has to be either an Elation sustain or another Elation DPS that can substitute Sparxie's role. So if Sparxie's DPS value can actually compete with EMC's value, Elation MC, then players could potentially consider sticking with RMC for the other teams, but at that point, just speculation, because who knows if EMC is going to become a sustain. So with that, we come to the end of our 2 new units, and now jumping into the reruns. So for the reruns of this patch, it's actually really interesting because it essentially ties up every single loose end a player might face after investing in the older teams. Again, remember that Yao Guang's rerun does not last for 6 weeks, it's only going to be for 3 weeks, which will then reset on Sparxie's rerun banner. So for the first rerun, it is pretty much going to be for your DOT mains with the buff Black Swan as well as high incidence. So if you want to play DOT, you already have Kafka, you're like, oh my god, I pull Kafka, I want to wait for a DOT rerun, then this is going to be it, right? Investing in both units alongside your Kafka is going to be a very safe bet, but if you don't want to play DOT, then there should be no issues to skip them whatsoever. Evernight is going to be essentially for your Remembrance flagship owners who missed her due to the last patch because, for example, you pull for Cyrene and you pull pull for high scene, but you did not manage to pick up Evernight. So this is pretty much going to be your final piece, rounding up one of, if not the strongest flagship we've ever seen in HSR history, and maintain your flagship value for a longer period of time. Moving on to the second rerun, Sparkle is free. That's all we need to say, right? For her particular islands, I personally don't really find them that worth a potential 160 pulls, so almost no reason to get this whatsoever, assuming you do get the free Sparkle. The Rare Bar rerun as the rarest HSR unit in the entire game is going to be bad. So if you want to pull or break units, you had Dahlia, but you kind of tired of Firefly, you're tired of Blue Hill, you want to try to play an alternative super rate DPS, then you can consider picking up this legendary Pokemon for your enjoyment. Lastly, Serija is going to be an almost definitive must pull for final mains if you still do not have Serija till this day. And yes, I know exactly who you are. People that have pulled for Edu Vidon and they still skip Serija until now. Right, just get it. You can also consider running Serija for a Nexa or even Archer if needed, but definitely not as high of an urgency. Now, do note, Serija will not be able to work with Sparxie, so it is what it is. And with that, we have come to the end of our video over here. Really quick. In summary, Yao Guang has the highest inherent potential, but if there's no urgent need as your teams are going to be already doing well as of right now, then she really doesn't have the urgency to pull due to the lack of an Elation DPS at the current moment. You can wait for version 4.1 or even 4.2 Elation DPS and the eventual rerun for Yao Guang if needed. If you would like to, you could consider getting a single copy of Yao Guang if you did not invest a lot in your other teams. Now remember, Yao Guang will last till the end of Sparxie, which means the banner is going to last for 6 weeks. That means that we will know exactly what are the units going to be in version 4.1, and likely we've also watched the live stream event, so we get a much better understanding, and there's pretty much no reason to rush and pull for her. For Sparxie, she's going to be a very solid version for Elation DPS, but there might be more coming in the future, and unless team building expands beyond 4 members, or we can run multiple Elation DPS across the different teams, it might be hard to compete with not one, but 2 different potential DPS being Evanesia as well as Silverwolf's SP, so the competition is just very high. Reruns are going to be on a personal basis. Pick out what you need for your respective teams before moving to the Elation and deciding on the version 4 team that you would like to play. For my personal free-to-play account, I will most likely be skipping all of the units in version 4 until more news will be released on version 4.1, and then I will decide accordingly. Likely, I might be putting a copy of Yao Guang just for the Elation support and build a team from there. But then again, I did also mention that I personally do not want to play a flagship. I want to try something new just to prove that you do not need to keep playing flagship in Honkai Star Rail in order to thrive as a free-to-play player, right? So with that, we have come to the end of today's content. Let me know what you guys in the comments below. Are you going to be pulling Yao Guang? Who are you going to put for in the rerun? Sparxie is just so goddamn cute. What of the day is going to be? Bleh. Join the use code POKE for 10% of gamer subs. All the best for your groups. See you guys next time. Bye bye.